I'm sure we've all run into those situations. We don't want to be in a situation where, we've built something and then, it doesn't work for different functions and different teams. So really having that buy-in to really work together to come up with a joint solution that is holistic is a really important step. It's a tricky component, not only from, my own personal standpoint in terms of me articulating some of the assumptions sometimes, but also encouraging the team to also be able to break that down into specific assumptions that we can, talk through. This point's really about the mental game, being resilient, because you really don't know until you actually do it. And, you can do everything that you can, and that's what you really should be doing, right? Like making sure you obviously have some checklists around performance and capabilities and metrics and, internal testing, beta testing, all those things that you can do to the best of your knowledge. But until you actually open this up to the public, you don't really know. So I think it's like being comfortable with the fact that, okay, I'm going to launch this out. I need to make sure that I have, sprints built in to support that once it goes live. To react quickly to that feedback is also like an important key.
Hello leaders and welcome to today's Practical Wednesday session. Now, when we're talking about MVPs or just testing products before really launching them in the market, we all know this super famous, I won't call it a saying because it's a mantra, by Reid Hoffman. If you're not embarrassed by the first product, the first version that you launch to the market, well, you launch too late, right? So the thing about MVP is that the fact that we put mantras or acronym to it doesn't make it to be any easier. And launching products, either if you're a small organization or startup or a big organization, can be a real challenge. So how can you actually do it? How can you actually break this big philosophy into something that you can actually test with your future users? And this is exactly what we're going to talk about today in this amazing Practical Wednesday session. By the way, my name is Maria Cassis. I'm the founder and general manager of Product League, and what we do is helping you to become the best product manager you can be. We have an amazing mentoring program of 4 months. We do it twice a year with a learning system, with events, workshops, basically everything that you need in order to become the best product manager you can be. So if you want to follow us and to be notified about future events like this awesome one, make sure to like this video and to like our channel because we want to get to know you better. So to talk about MVPs, we are going to have a special guest live from Canada, Howard Chen, and I'm so happy to invite you to the stage. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Happy to have you here. So just so you know, guys, why we're so excited about having Howard with us, Howard Chen is the innovation leader with experience in designing, launching, and scaling products. He's currently building the product management practice at Goodfood, a rapidly growing online grocery retailer in Canada. Before joining Goodfood, Howard was responsible for the online shopping experience for Canada's largest grocery chain, scaling the web experience and launching the mobile apps. He has passion for collaboration, building strong teams, and pursuing simplicity. But obviously, as you are here, you also have passion to share your knowledge about MVPs with the international product community. It's so great having you here with us.
Awesome. Super excited to be here. And hopefully, we can add some value to everyone who's attending the session too.
That's the spirit. So guys, just so you know, after the session itself, we'll have a Q&A with Howard. So if you have any question about MVPs, how to do it in small organizations, how to do it in big ones, how to break this idea down, what are the practices, what are the tools that you need to use, Howard is here for you. So make sure to submit your questions in the chat. We will select the most interesting ones after the session is almost over, and then we'll continue with the Q&A session, and it's going to be just awesome. So are you ready, Howard?
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
Perfect. Looking forward to learning from you and can't wait to see what questions the audience have for you later on.
Fantastic. Thank you. Great. Thanks so much for the introduction. I think what I was going to do is, basically just kind of walk you through, the MVP process, just to add a little bit more flavor also to what Moria had said is also, from the experiences I've had, it would include things like, exactly. It's like, how do we launch new services as well as, add additional features to existing services. So definitely want to, share some of those experiences with you today. So I would say, let me go to the next slide. It's really, it's about like, is the MVP dead, right? So like, I think even sometimes when I go into an organization, such as myself in the last couple months, joining Goodfood, I think one of the things I was conscious about was even bringing up that topic of MVP, because I know there's been a lot of articles written about this, a lot of conversation around like, is that still even a thing, right? And I know there are other new terms like MAP and MLP, most lovable product, minimum awesome product, right? So these are some concepts that are also emerging in the space. I think that what I would say is it's really, and I'll kind of take you through that thought process today, is really the philosophy, regardless of what you really call it. I would say is very much like an important step in terms of building out products and being able to get to a launch phase successfully, right? So a couple things I would say is in the case of in some situations, in particularly very competitive large corporations, there is still that kind of question around like MVP, right? Because the expectations are already so high. Can you even go out with something that's really minimal? And I think that based on the industry and the company itself, the MVP may be a little bit bigger than like a smaller company with fewer competitors, but really the idea should still be an important one to consider and keep in mind, because regardless of how many resources that you might have, you still need to be able to quickly get to launch. So that's what I'll get into today. So goals of an MVP. So a couple that are important in my mind in the experiences that I've had would be things like being able to quickly launch a product, right? Because you could very easily fall into the trap of really building and building and building, and not really being sure of when to go because of this like such a large scope. So really, it's like how do you build the momentum? That's how I think about it. Is like, how do you build the momentum to really quickly move through the different phases to get to launch? And momentum's a really important one in my mind, regardless of the organization that you're in. I think as a product leader, when you join, in my case, it's like joining a new company. It's around like there is all this uncertainty about whether or not the team is ready to to build things really quickly. You don't even know yourself, right? Because you're really new to that situation. So really, a lot of it is building that momentum, and it could still apply to existing experiences. Even in your current role, where sometimes if you're building, you're kind of coming up with a new concept. Like it's like how do you break that problem down into a smaller way so that again, you can start to build momentum, especially if it's like a really daunting initiative that's in front of you, right? So really, I think it's like, for me, one of the big things is really that ability to quickly launch and build momentum. The other one is around the main goal of the MVP in my mind also is, you're really at the end of the day trying to solve a problem, right? So is it a new business model? Is it a new technology you're trying to test out? Are you trying to solve some sort of customer problem or complaint or pain point? And so those, what is it that you're trying to solve from that perspective? And how do you, tied very closely to that is how do you, quickly learn from that experience too, right? So I think, for me, those are some of the, really key goals of the MVP. And, the quickly learn part is also really important because, I'm sure we're all in industries that are, hyper competitive. If you're too slow to launch something, your competitor may already be capturing all those learnings and moving on already to the next iteration. whereas you may be still kind of trying to build out the full solution. So really, the quicker you can learn, the faster you can implement those learnings into your product and make it successful for the customer. And I think it's really, for me, it's like one of those great things where it becomes very satisfying if you're building a product that has very could be very slim set of features, but they're very they're high quality, and everything is being used for a purpose, and there was a reason for building it. So really, kind of in summary around the goals, it's really like, how do you move quickly? How do you break things into a smaller problem, and then start really learning as quickly as possible from a live set of customers. So I think that's one of the big things. And then conversely, I would say on the flip side of that, obviously, it's like, what are some of the mistakes, right? And I've definitely made my own share of product launch mistakes, whether it's like a feature that we thought was really cool at the time, and we built it out, and it didn't get the traction, and we spent too much effort building it, right? I think there are other situations where it would be even like a bigger situation where we would have maybe spent even more time building out a full set of features for that initial launch. And again, finding out that either we were too late because we took way too long, or we just kind of bloated it with a bunch of features that we thought would be critical and essential, but in the end, maybe the customer didn't even make it past that first step. So really, it's like, how do we boil it down so that we can still make mistakes? Because for sure, I'm definitely making my share of mistakes as we go as well. But like, how do you minimize that blast radius? How do you make sure that it's containable and you can react quickly to build the next iteration and focus your energy where the real pain points are from a business or customer standpoint. So really, those are some of the high level ones. Moria had mentioned about the Reid Hoffman quote, which I think is a great one. It's like, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of the product, you've launched too late. I would say, the flavor that I would also add to this is, I think the regrets that I have had would be more so on products that I have either delayed launching because, it was too bloated, or we, wanted to spend too much time kind of refining it, and then in the end, the refinements may or may not have really even mattered, or conversely to launching something a little bit. I've also had experiences maybe like launching things a little bit too soon. Probably would have benefited a little bit more with a little bit more refinement, but at the same time, we're able to learn quickly and adapt, to those situations, very quickly as well. And luckily, in those situations, we are able to then very easily understand what are the major pain points, right? So, as an example, it could be a situation where we've, launched an app, and it wasn't at the point where we wanted it to be, from our internal testing, it seemed okay. But there were a couple of pain points that luckily we were also able to budget that time to, quickly fix and learn that, hey, it is indeed a customer pain point that we need to resolve. So I think those are some of the things, whereas on the flip side, it's really like you may be too late and may not be addressing the situation if you have a bloated MVP. So that's kind of, my 2 cents on this one. If I move over to kind of like, this is more, I would say, transitioning more in terms of, some of the tips that I might be, that I would share today is the first one is around, stakeholder alignment, right? So in any project or product build, obviously there's these tenets of, project and product management, right? So, these are the 3 core, components. I would say that, quality is one where I would say today, the expectations are too high. You want to make sure if you are launching something, even if you're cutting that scope, you need to make sure that the quality is still there. So that's kind of, unsaid, you don't want a site or an app that continues to crash. You want to make sure that it meets the base table stakes and the base foundations, but maybe it doesn't, do all of the, doesn't cover all of the use cases necessarily, but the ones that it does, it should really do it in a really, good way. So the point I would say about stakeholder alignment, I would say, is around just making sure you understand what those options are from the organization that you're in, right? So as an example, in some larger organizations, maybe there's less, I would say less of a need necessarily in some cases to hit the timing exactly, because in some cases you're able to catch up later on in terms of like, you have the scale, that if you dedicate, if you do it right, you can actually really win in the end, and you don't have to necessarily be, first to market in some situations. In other situations, it's more important to really just, get out there, going back to the MVP mode of like, quickly learning, quickly iterating. So really, I think, you really need to understand those levers that you have. Other examples could be some organizations when you're stuck, you can say, hey, due to the nature of the initiative, we really need to, maybe it's like up our cost by, externally hiring resources to really cut down that timeline. Other places, you really, don't have that option, and you just need to really work on the scope and reducing that scope. So really, I think this one is about, making sure you understand those trade-offs, making sure you understand what the, kind of the risk tolerance is in that organization. For instance, the one I'm at now is like, we are able to take bigger risks. I would say is like, and there, the appetite for experimentation is pretty high. So, we're able to do things like, hey, build out a wait list, build out a checkout flow, while we're still building out some of the other features around, automating the sign up flows and, things like that, right? Like, not the whole experience is smoothed out. So we're able to kind of cut scope, but continue to move forward and learn. And then as we, are able to catch up, then we can start to launch those other features and bring the whole site to be more holistic, right? So really kind of working on specific parts of the site, making them great, really picking on those, and then moving on to the next step, rather than, building out the whole new, redesign for the entire site, and then launching it out, right? So I think that's part of what we are looking at doing as well. It kind of really then, the first point really then kind of, for me, transitions into this next point, which is around, the need for creating clarity, right? So especially in an MVP situation, the tips that I would give would be to really, one is break out that big problem into smaller steps. And, this is a technique that I use, is it's around like even MVP, like sometimes, you can really consider MVP as, I think most people, I would say, is you probably consider MVP even itself as a step. What I like to do is actually even break that down even further. So like I would break down an MVP into generally 3 steps, and folks that work with me know that as well, as like we kind of break it down into 3 MVP phases, sometimes 4. I really try to keep it to 3. But again, it kind of goes back to like building momentum, right? So as an example, the first step might be, hey, we just want to pop up a, like a landing page as an example. I'm just kind of throwing that example out. And then maybe the next phase is like, okay, we want to make sure that we have the features for an employee launch. And in which case it becomes, your scope is still reduced. You don't have the full set of features, and you're willing to accept some of the, consequences around, manual work and workarounds that need to take place. But at the same time, you're learning through all these different, different steps. And then maybe the third phase then becomes like, the broader, go live with public as, the next big step, in which case you probably need to make sure that you have, all the table stakes critical to like a platform or product, ready and launched. And things refined at that point. So that's kind of how I'd like to break it down. Then once I have it broken down by those phases, then it's also easier, let's call it, for me to then also share it broadly with the organization. The benefit of that too is, for those of you who have been working on these projects and products, there's always those questions around like, hey, when's feature XYZ coming? We need this. And so by having it broken down into these different phases, it's easy to articulate, okay, yes, definitely again, to make this up too, is like, search functionality is important, but it's not going to happen in the first 3 phases. It's something on our radar. It may happen, in future, right? So I think that for me really helps in terms of, creating that clarity. And then the other part along with the clarity gets into the metrics as well, right? So by being crisp on the phases, the second part is around the metrics, right? So how do we make sure that for each of those phases we have very clear numbers that we're trying to hit? So whether that's ratings or customer satisfaction numbers that we need to hit, or maybe it's business metrics like average order values and basket mixes. It could be quality issues that we're tracking, right? So these are some things that we want to make sure that we're very clear on, so that we can articulate that as we move to the different phases. As well, I would say is along with the metrics, tied into that is like the learning goals, right? So what are we trying to learn in each of these different phases, being informed and measured, throughout that process. So yeah, that's kind of like the clarity for me, is like just really laying out that plan, making it as simple as possible, and also as clear as possible. So that's kind of the clarity piece. The next one is, I call this like kind of joint planning and documentation. The whole idea is we want to avoid silos. Especially now, right? Given, I would say like, everyone is likely working from home, given the COVID situation, I think it makes it even more important. Like, I think these are things that we should always be doing. I think prior to COVID, a lot of the times you could easily, whiteboard and sticky note everything and kind of work together on these things. I think now, especially, it just makes it harder, right? So the way that I would say, how this comes to life would be, making sure we include as many different stakeholders as possible in the planning process. So whether on the product side, it could be, product design, product managers, the technical team, to make sure that we have the right, user stories, kind of collected and, kind of worked through, but also bringing in all the other stakeholders required as well for a project to be successful. Because, given your situation, you may have multiple functions that are really, quite important partners in bringing something to life. In our case, there's a huge collaboration between marketing as well as operations. I guess kind of call it merchandising, but really it's like kind of getting the right products as well on the site. So having visibility, a common document, a common way of explaining how things are being designed and planned, and allowing comments to occur in that state, and making sure that that's a really live, living document where we can really capture those, that type of, feedback or question. It becomes really important for the success of the overall initiative, because you don't want to be, I'm sure we've all run into those situations. We don't want to be in a situation where, we've built something and then, it doesn't work for different functions and different teams. So really having that buy-in to really work together to come up with a joint solution that is holistic is a really important step in terms of, especially if you want to move fast and, build out the MVP. This one, like, is, again, it's kind of like an add-on to the language, right? So it's like, now, next, later. Excuse me. So in terms of, again, as you're building out this initiative, this MVP, a lot of times, because it is so bare, it really does, beg that question around, like, hey, when is XYZ feature coming, right? Like, when is personalization coming, or whatever, whatever that feature might be in your industry or in your product, and to really keep the team focused. I find that, not only creating that view of what's in the MVP, but then also there's this view of like, hey, maybe it's not even in the MVP, it's going to be something that's going to happen later. So this is kind of a tie-in to, I won't get into here, but really that overall road mapping around, how do you articulate what's going to happen, in the different kind of time frames, and, given your organization's appetite. It may may or may not have a specific commitment in terms of timing yet. Obviously we want to get to more refined numbers, but you definitely want to implement some way of articulating when certain requests or certain features are going to be more imminent, and other ones that are going to be kind of backlogged and you're going to look at it later. And I find that really also helps to keep the team focused on building out that MVP. So that's kind of what this is about. I think we talked a bit about the sharing broadly. The part that I would say is in particular that I'll talk about is this being open to criticism component, which I think you're kind of laying yourself out there. You're putting all your designs and specs out there. So definitely there's going to be a lot of back and forth. So I think definitely being open to those to the different feedback, to the criticism, definitely need to keep that in mind. I think again, it depends on the team, depends on the appetite for risks, but at least by having that open conversation, then you can start to manage expectations around when are things going to happen. Is it going to be now? Is it going to be later? Does it fit in the MVP? Really having that open dialogue for us has been really, really helpful. So I would say really the point on this is really how do you share this as much as you can, whether it's like in Slack channels, in meetings, in documents that you can share, email where it makes sense in whatever organizations that you may be in. It's really making sure that you get the engagement from the different stakeholders, making sure that they are giving you feedback, making sure they're aware of it and responding to that feedback in the framework that we talked about earlier. Really helps to avoid any kind of future surprises or roadblocks that might appear, to prevent you from really moving quickly on the MVP. So you really want to open that conversation up as quickly and as much as possible, given the fact that in a lot of cases you want to move really quickly. So this part is around when you do hit the roadblocks, right? Because I don't know if I've ever necessarily been in a situation where I haven't hit the roadblock. So really, it's like, how do you articulate those assumptions that you're making, right? So maybe you're hitting a roadblock and you're like, okay, I can't hit the the dates that I've articulated earlier in those MVP phases. What is critical here, I find, is to really be able to summarize the situation, figure out what metric is the issue going to be affecting, right? So kind of to the example that I kind of alluded to earlier around, like, okay, maybe the first piece is around setting up the landing page. The next one is around employee testing. Maybe if you've made an assumption that, okay, I need to have I don't know, again, I'm kind of making this up a little bit, but like, let's say search, right? So it's like maybe at the beginning somehow that got squeezed into the assumptions that you needed for phase 2. But I think you need to kind of go back at that point again and just revisit, okay, are those hitting, if we don't have search, how does that impact my metrics? How does that impact that phase? And then have that conversation around, does that need to happen today? What phase does that impact? Is it one of the MVP phases? Will it stop us from moving forward? Or is that really something that we can, kind of, it's not ideal, but can we hold off and, cover that in a future period of time? So that's really, for me, around, kind of articulating the assumptions, because, from my experiences, really helped, there's a couple of barriers, I guess, to this. One is like, having the humility to really lay it all out there, because I think that's the other component, right? It was like, oh shoot, like things are not going the way you had planned. But how do you actually articulate the assumptions in a way that makes sense to everyone, so that everyone can also help kind of overcome them, right? So whether it's call it the leadership, in terms of them looking at it and saying, oh, actually, that's something that you're right, we don't really need it right now, and giving you that support. It could be the other way around. It could be your team members or people that are on your team that are saying, hey, we can't move forward because of X, Y, Z. and encouraging them to, explain, what are the assumptions they've made, and make it very clear so that you, again, can then say, oh, okay, actually, maybe we don't really need that today. So I think that part is really important. I find that it's a tricky component, not only from, my own personal standpoint in terms of me articulating some of the assumptions sometimes, but also encouraging the team to also be able to break that down into, specific assumptions that we can, talk through. So that's, I would say that's mainly it around this. And then, really it is reinforcing that idea of like, okay, great, there is this challenge, but how does that really impact those, those metrics that we agreed upon earlier? So that's that point. The transition here goes into like the prioritization, right? So how do you, ruthlessly prioritize as you go? Because, as you're building this out, likely you're going to then also encounter other potential areas where the scope will expand. So I think it's really being very, very diligent and vigilant in terms of, how do we make sure that the mindset of everyone's is around, prioritization in terms of, getting to our key milestones. And this is important because, like, you have to have that buy-in from all the folks on the team, because what can easily happen is, either there's a new team resource or, as you're brainstorming or coming up with solutions, it's very easy to kind of go off and, think of like the ideal state. And the ideal state is a great one. Like, you definitely, I also believe you need to have a North Star, but you also always have to have that idea of like, how do you pare that back, right? How do you pare that back to reasonable scope where you can actually, hit those timelines with. And I think that this, in my mind, this one, there's a couple of thoughts I had around this one too, is around, I find that, going back to the earlier point around having the team bought into this, sometimes you are just, you're beating that drum. And, sometimes I'll get tired, right? Sometimes I'll be like, okay, I harped on this so much in the past, and okay, maybe I'll let this one, kind of expand a little bit more than I had hoped. So just, personal weakness, right? A moment of weakness. And so I think that's where the team, having the team really bought into that really helps, because then, they can also chime in too, right? Using the same language. And that's why, I think it's really important to have that, the MVP phases really easily, clearly articulated, having the now, next, later kind of framework also very easily articulated and supported, so that they can also call these things out too. So it's not just about you, it's about, how do you bring that team along to constantly think about how do you, continue to stay focused to hit the key goals for the MVP. So that's, I would say, one of the key things around the prioritization component and pruning that, I just wanted to bring up for the team today. This one is really about, in my mind, it's really about, how do you keep the right mindset, right? So I know for me that, one of the things is, going through this, it's not easy, right? So because you're going to get a lot of pressure, right? So I know I have in the past, in terms of, why can't we get, all these features out in such a short period of time? When is the next feature coming out, right? Like, it just becomes a situation where, there are a lot of requests, especially as a product manager. You are, you're seeing, right, not only from your stakeholders, probably from your tech team, probably from other product managers. So I think for me, this one is really important around, like, how do you keep a level head? How do you make sure that you are, comfortable with, being uncomfortable? In this case, it's like, how would I describe it? It's also the fact that, yes, you need to figure out, the phases that we talked about, but also, as um, as you build out that product, I think a lot of times, there could be other priorities that kind of land on you as well, right? So I think that really it's about keeping that that frame of mind, having a positive mindset, because really I think no one else is really in a position where they can really understand all the requests that are coming through, and then your job is really to help figure out, okay, how do we prioritize this, knowing that everyone's request is ultra important and is needed right away, but then using a language and a framework where you can hopefully get the buy-in so that you can create some focus and sanity for the team. The other part is also around actually launching, once you are launching, right? So that's also can be an uncomfortable feeling once you're like, okay, I'm really now going to launch this product into the world, because you really don't know until you actually do it. And you can do everything that you can, and that's what you really should be doing, right? Like making sure you obviously have some checklists around performance and capabilities and metrics and internal testing, beta testing, all those things that you can do to the best of your knowledge. But until you actually open this up to the public, you don't really know. So I think it's like being comfortable with the fact that, okay, I'm going to launch this out. I need to make sure that I have sprints built in to support that once it goes live, to react quickly to that feedback is also like an important key. So yeah, so it's kind of like this point's really about the mental game, being resilient, and being able to like take all that in. So all the requests and all the demands on your on the time of yourself and your team, and being able to compartmentalize that into a plan that you can articulate easily back to the overall team. So I think those are probably, those are the main kind of tips that I had. I'm going to just summarize the key points, and then definitely happy to take any questions that the team and folks here might have. So I think in my mind, whatever you end up calling this, the MVP is in my mind still alive and well. It's really this philosophy. So call it whatever you like. It's really about like breaking this big problem down into something small that you can quickly learn, quickly iterate, and have the best chance of hitting the goals that you've set out, right? So whether it's a learning goal, a business goal, solving a customer problem, I think the philosophy of the MVP I still really strongly believe in. Sometimes I do cringe still when I say MVP because it sometimes feels dated, but really it's like the philosophy of how do you lean way build product and launch quickly. The next part I would say is around, how do you really easily drive clarity? So as you navigate an MVP and bring that to life, how do you make sure that, these are set up in phases and gates that make sense in terms of the outcome, the learning objectives? You want to set out these metrics really upfront so that if you succeeded within each of the phases, you are using the metrics to guide you. So meaning, are you able to move to the next phase? If the quality or the site performance is horrible, use the metrics to really guide you along. And then the last one is really about, staying calm, right? So kind of that last point around, the mental game, right? So, keeping a level mindset and understanding that there's going to be lots of requests. I think once you start to gain some traction, that's going to hopefully get a little bit better, and the buy-in in terms of like understanding, by taking this approach, we're actually able to move quickly, even though it looks like it's a very slim scope. But as soon as you can start to feed that back into the organization, I find that is super helpful as well. So I think those are the main ones I wanted to cover today. And then maybe we can open it up to questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Howard, for sharing your insights and experience and tips and tricks with us. One of the things that stayed in my mind after you said it's that going back to the saying, the famous saying by Reid, it's not just that you have this annoying feeling. It's also about regrets, right? So when we're talking about regrets, it can be also for something that we wish we would have done. If we had the option, the amazing option of going back in time, or the things that we wish we weren't doing, right? It's either something that you did and you wish you didn't do it, or something that you didn't do and you wish that you have done it. So may I challenge you and ask you to give like concrete examples, share for either from your experience currently in Goodfood or your previous place of work, like just cases that the audience and I can learn from when we're talking about regrets about everything.
Yeah, I mean, regrets definitely, or lessons for sure. Like, in a past organization, we launched like a mobile app, right? And we kind of did it a little bit, like we were really trying to get that out really quickly. And I think at the beginning when we first launched, we didn't anticipate some of the stability issues that might have, occurred, right? So I think that was suboptimal in our mind. So at the time we were kind of, obviously very upset at ourselves. But we were like, so yeah, I guess the first little bit we were, the star rating was horrible, right? Like we were in the 2-star range. But I think, the team was very focused around, how do we understand the customer pain point? So that I think that drove a lot of, very focused action that then, eventually brought us to, 4+ stars. But really, I guess my regret there is around like, kind of going back to that earlier quote is like, I'm glad that we went out because I think, there's a lot of customers that, still benefited from, having that option. But yeah, I think it would have been better. Like, it would be great if we could have had, better testing from that standpoint in terms of like a stability side of things. So, but yeah, I think that would be one example.
Perfect. Okay, so we're going back to the chat, okay, with some questions, and we have a question from Dimitri, and he's asking, did you have worked on MVPs outside organization? What is your advice for beginners? I guess what Dimitri has in mind is about startups, versus organizations. So when we're talking about smaller scale of resources, of just human power and all other aspects of organization, what are your tips for doing it the right way?
Yeah, for smaller organizations, I mean, I would say, I kind of consider the one I'm in right now is smaller in terms of the tech size, right? So it is pretty small. Um, we we still, I mean, I think we take a very very lean approach, right? So it is looking at specifically, okay, what are the key metrics that we're trying to drive? I think I find that to be a great way of looking at it, right? So what are the metrics we're trying to drive? What are the phases? Like kind of going back to that earlier point, I find that works really well. Whereas in larger organizations, sometimes you could be more thinking about, okay, there is this massive features that we're trying to launch, and you almost don't really, it's more like, you get the one from an OKR perspective, you get a one for launching that XYZ. So maybe it's like, mobile app X, launched by this date, and it's got like a full set of requirements, and sometimes there's work with external parties, and so you just try to do as much as you can and get that to launch. Whereas if you have a small organization, you have very limited resources. So I would say it's like and definitely that's the case where I'm at now, is really get very focused on what kind of problem you're trying to solve, and then break it into those phases to get to that output and outcome.
I 100% agree with you. I think the biggest resource any startup can have is focus. So, absolutely. And it goes to MVPs as well. We are moving to another question from Asaf. And Asaf has two interesting questions. I will read it out loud. How do you go about validating two different users? He's talking about a marketplace. Okay. So when you have, network effect, two kinds of users. So how do you actually validate the two? And his second question actually is tied to this one. How do you find who your customer really is? Okay, so if you have one, or even if you have more, how do you actually validate a hypothesis that you have about who the user really is? And when we're talking about more than one kind of user, so how does this affect the MVP road that you are trying to walk?
Yeah, so I guess if I'm interpreting this right, is this like a physical product that you're listing on a marketplace? Is that kind of
I think it actually is asking about a marketplace,
okay?
because otherwise you wouldn't have the two kind of users. So let's say if we are going back in time and we are now building eBay, okay? So we have the sellers and we have you and I that just go online and try to find, I don't know, the puzzle that we used to have when we were 6 years old. So how do we actually make sure that the hypothesis that we have in mind in terms of who the user is, who is going to be the buyer, and who is going to be the one that actually is the seller, let's call it this way, even though it may be something, another way to call it. How do we validate it, and how does the fact that we have two, if it actually does affect it, how does what will be the consequence of that when we're talking about every piece, because it's getting to be more difficult.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I suppose for this one, let's see. So I think he has a comment here about, okay. Yeah.
His next comment is, yeah, in my question, I meant that your product is the market platform itself with a buyer and a seller or something.
Right. So I suppose like the MVP on that, it's on the buyer side, the challenge I would think too is like how do you probably is like how do you know what kind of items they're looking for on your marketplace platform. So one potential approach could be around maybe it is around like just offering. Well, I guess part of it is like really understanding first, doing some research, understanding the market, like overall broader marketplace itself, and what consumers are really looking for from that point of view. That will hopefully inform how you position yourself as well. And then in terms of merchandising, maybe it's like merchandising selection. Then I wonder if there is a situation where you can pick a varied amount of items from different different types of categories that you can very low inventory, but just kind of test it out and see what kind of click-through rates you're going to get, what kind of purchasing conversion rates you're getting from that standpoint.
By the way, like Zappos did.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
They didn't even purchase it. They just took the pictures, took the just a description, they put it online, and they wanted to see which items will actually bring more users into purchase the items that they provide.
Yeah, totally. Like I think it's like that seems to be scenario that happens for sure. So whether it's like a sign up page for your buyers, like like a similar approach too, right? Like you could just have almost like a wait list. Like we've kind of been doing some of that as well in the past, where there's a service that we do actually intend to build, but we create a wait list where we try to understand what is the demand for doing participating in that particular activity. So whether it's on the buyer side or the seller side, maybe it's like you can, as a buyer, as people that sign up to sell on your marketplace, you can advertise like, hey, if you sign up, these are the terms. Understand how people sign up before you actually even build that out. And then as a buyer, you can put up products and see if there is click through as well on those products.
Absolutely. And if I may jump in, so actually I'll tell you a secret that this subject was one of the things I specialized in during my master's degree. So the mathematical aspects of these questions. So actually I want to add something to the table. So when we're talking about subjects like this one of the first hypotheses that you need to have in mind is which of the users is the one that will be harder for you to get and will actually make you to invest more time and other resources in pulling them into your platform. And then you need to define all your strategy based on this one. Because if we're going back to eBay or any other platform, basically, when we're talking about purchasing online, shopping online, it's probably easier for you to get people to sell online, right? Because you have some junk at home, or I don't know, you're just buying like bulk products in China and you bring them to your country and you sell it or whatever. But it's much more difficult to make people to go online, trust your website, and put their credit card in it. So the hypotheses that have to do with trust for users, making them, find your website and your platform and the new features of it appealing, this is where your strategy can either win or fail. So if I'm going, Howard, back to what you said before, everything that you need to do here is to just like pinpointing this hypothesis that you have, that you're saying, because I'm offering that kind of user, okay, because you need to define which one is harder to get into your platform. Because I'm offering these features to that user, and I have the assumption that they will drive the other kind of user. Everything that comes out of that, this is where you either win or fail. So this is the biggest opportunity for you to do an MVP. Okay, because this is where the magic happens. So when we're talking about two kind of users, is defining which one of them is actually more challenging for you to get into the platform. A crazy interesting subject. I'm happy that you mentioned. Obviously, I have much passion to it, and I've been a few platforms like this in my life. Okay, so we are continuing with a question from Sharon, who's asking, customer discovery exercise, dummy platforms for A/B testing with users. Do you have something like this that you used previously that you can recommend? And what is it that you think about the subject? That, instead of really building the product, or, not the product, like the minimal viable product, the MVP, instead of that, just using a platform that is out there and test it.
Yeah, for sure. Like what we've used in the past is, usertesting.com, like equivalents, right? So just to understand, from a customer research standpoint, generally speaking, I have not used, platforms where, we actually don't build out the product, but we generally have the intent that we're going to build something. And then we are, we would use A/B testing, whether it's Optimizely, Google Optimize, whatever those platforms might be, to help inform and refine the idea. But generally speaking, it's like, okay, we are going down this route. It's just like, what are the tweaks that we want to make, and how do we make this even stickier? So that's kind of has been my experience.
Perfect. And the audience is asking if the session will be recorded. So hell yeah, because we want you to learn as much as you can from Howard. So don't worry, you'll have the link delivered to your inbox after this session. We're continuing with a question from Ling, and she's asking, when the MVP was built, one, what strategies did you take to launch the product? And second, what did launch look like? And third, can you give examples of metrics you use for customer adoption? Wow, this is a big chunk of questions, so we'll go one by one. So first, strategies.
Yeah.
Launching
product, yeah.
Strategies that you have.
Generally speaking, for the launch, we usually phase it out, right? So generally it will be like, hey, first phase is, can we eat our own dog food, right? So whether it's employee lunch, and generally we learn a ton from that as well. Expose a bunch of bugs that we can improve upon to the next phase. And then the next phase, generally speaking, in this strategy would be then, hey, maybe there's like friends and family, kind of warm folks that we can reach out to, that we can test a little bit more and learn a bit more. If we have the luxury of having actually like a beta test group, then we would look at that. Otherwise, we would look at how do we whether it's using a platform to segment the customer base so that we don't, open it up to everyone on day one, or like a feature flag or some way to like really limit it until we build out the confidence, whether it's geographical or, whatever that might be, and then continue to scale that out. So that's generally, kind of the approach that we've been able to take on your first question. And then the launch generally, depending on the company too, right? Like some companies you can do a softer launch, right? So I find that to be quite helpful is, you have the product out there, you've gone through all the, opened up all the gates, everyone can access it, but you don't go out loud with marketing yet. So if you have the luxury of that, I find that really helpful because you get a lot of, early adopters, early, really passionate people about either your brand or your product, to really provide good insight and good support, and word of mouth. But in other cases, it's like you don't have the choice. So you don't have that luxury. It's all going to go on day one. So I think that's kind of, if I have a choice, I would love to do, soft and then like a louder launch. And then for metrics, yeah, definitely, depending on, again, also depends on the company, depends on the industry. Sometimes we've used things like if it's a mobile standpoint, maybe it's like a percentage of orders through mobile. And then, you kind of can create a ramp up plan on that. Other metrics could be things like, okay, out of my total customer base, how many do I expect to go out, within, X number of weeks or months of the launch. Some other ones would be, not so much about adoption, but really around, just really keeping track of your NPS or your ratings, how that informs the rest of, your plan. So those are kind of the thoughts I had around this.
And it's definitely going to be different from one product to another, because in some products you count on that users will buy your product or use your service once in 5 years or once a year. Let's say you'll have a car rental services. Okay, so usually someone will use it once a year in average. But if you're a grocery chain, like your product, for example, so the frequency should be different. So it's really differ from one product to another. And going back to the second question, Link, did you ask how the launch will look like? So one tip from me, it goes to one of the things that you mentioned, Howard, about the users. So when you have the MVP and you have this like small base of customers or users that give you feedback, from those that you actually change something in the product following the MVP, following their feedback, make sure to reach out to them before the launch and tell them, listen, so remember the feedback that you gave about whatever it is? So we listen because we wanted to be happy about the product. And then, like you said, like having the early adopters and the fans. So this is exactly where you have the opportunity to get more people fall in love with your product. So these are awesome questions, Link. We do have time for one more question from the audience. So I'm calling all leaders in the crowd to submit the questions. In the meantime, Howard, can I challenge you?
Sure.
So we are product professionals, and product management, one of the key elements of product management is prioritizing. So we talked about so many things, right? These sessions, how to test, what to test, building the organization. You even mentioned how to do it and the importance of doing this right on COVID, right? Which is, just a mind-blowing aspect of challenges to deal with when we're talking about MVPs. So from this pile of awesome content that you shared with us, what is the one thing, if you have to prioritize one tip or something to think about, that you would like everyone in the audience to keep in mind tomorrow morning when they're going to their desk and computer and start working?
For me, it is that clarity, right? So driving the clarity, making sure it's everyone's on the same page. I think so much of our product work is communication, collaboration. So I think that no one else will create that clarity, right? So it's kind of our job to create that clarity. So I think for me that is the number one step, because that also exposes once you share that and create that clarity, it also exposes gaps, which lead to other good conversations. So I think that for me is the big win.
And it's so hard, for the soul. It's so annoying to see good MVPs fail just because of miscommunication, right? About what you said before earlier about, when are we doing what is expected to be the first part, the second part, the third part of the MVP. Just this alignment of communication, and especially on these crazy days when we're trying to build new products, but we are doing it from different locations, it gets to be much more essential to our teamwork, right? So either if you planned to have an MVP even before COVID-19 started, or you just got into COVID and your users are in need for different features or different products and you need to adjust to the situation, make sure that you follow Howard examples and just wise words, and share your thoughts with as much clarity as possible with your team. Okay, I'm reading the comments from the guys. Both Saf and Link are very thankful for what you shared with them. And Dimitri has another question, and we will end with this one. And is asking, what is the biggest challenge that you, Howard, had to face when launching MVPs, and how you solved it?
For me, the biggest challenge is going back to the organizational expectations as well, right? So sometimes it's usually making sure you're on the same page on that too, right? So sometimes it's like the expectation on the org can be that, okay, it has to be fully baked and high quality before you go out as an MVP. And in your mind, you're thinking, oh, like that will take forever and it's not going to work. So there's that dilemma. And then on the complete opposite side, where it's like, okay, it doesn't matter, just get out there and make some changes. And in your own mind, you're thinking, well, you haven't even covered the base table stakes. How can we go out with that, right? So to me, I feel like it's really, how do you strike that right balance? To me, that is the hardest part. And then negotiating and getting, going back to the clarity part on what it means for that organization and for yourself to have an MVP, and what does that mean? To me, that is the biggest challenge.
Loving it. Thank you so much, Howard. I just want to remind the audience that in order for us to stay in touch with you, please make sure to like this video on our page so you'll be notified about future events. Howard, it has been a pleasure. I learned so much. I hope that you enjoyed as much as we did.
I had a great time. Thanks for inviting me.
Wonderful. So happy to hear that, and looking forward to have you here with us again on our stage. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, thoughts, just tips and tricks with us. Go
awesome.
MVP, guys. Make awesome products.
Thanks,
Bye, everyone.
Bye.